Hmm. A gentleman in the street gave me a story, The Miracle Day, an astounding victory over multiple sclerosis by Barbara. Okay. I mean, I'm like mad. So it's always good to distract yourself with a good story. So I only read the first page. I'm gonna finish. I still remember the whisperers as I struggled through the halls in high school. "Look at her stagger," I'd hear them say. "I'll bet you she's drunk. Kids can be cruel." They didn't know me or know what was really happening to me. I definitely wasn't walking a straight line. Occasionally I was even hanging on and banging into a locker. But I wasn't drunk. And I wish I could tell all the gossips how hard I tried to walk like a normal person. How much I wanted to write a letter without my hand trembling. How much I wanted to go a whole day without falling down. But if they asked me what was wrong, I'd say I didn't know. Not even the doctors knew. And as time went by, it was to get drastically worse. But back then in school, I was making a painful discovery about serious illness that I hadn't expected. It makes you feel like an outsider in the human family. Sickness can undermine your feelings of worth and usefulness. So you become sick in spirit too, at a time when you most need to feel close to God. How to be spiritually well, how to regain my sense of wholeness and value was a search that became as critical to me as finding ways to cope with my deteriorating health. In 1965, I'd been a typical active 15-year-old. Wow. He loved gymnastics, played the flute in high school orchestra, worked at the altar, worked at an after-school job, and headed the youth group at my church. My mother said she hadn't seen me sit still for 10 minutes in 3 years. But then weird things started happening. One day in gym class, I couldn't get my left hand to grasp the flying rings. That night, I slipped on the stairs at home. I slipped again the next day at school. Just part of growing up, the doctor said. Your symptoms will disappear in time, but they didn't. So I lurched down hallways, every step taking me farther into the unknown. After a while came double vision, then a brace for a left arm that was turning more and more into itself. I underwent one test after another, but nothing led to a diagnosis. I started college but had to drop out. I just wasn't well enough. Finally, in 1970, my doctor had some concrete information for me. "We've identified your condition, Barbara," he said. "You have MS, multiple sclerosis. It usually doesn't strike people quite so young as yourself." "What do we do now?" I asked. My doctor shook his head. "I'll tell you the truth. There's almost nothing we can do. This disease will slowly short-circuit your central nervous system because it hardens the tissue around your brain and spine. The wrong messages go to various parts of your body and they don't function properly. The severity varies. Very soon, the course my MS was taking became clear. Twice in 1971 and 1972, my heart and lungs failed. I was rushed to the hospital, near death. Then there was a period of stability when I neither got better nor very much worse, a common occurrence of MS. I attended college as a handicapped student and later worked as a secretary, but the disease was merely interrupted. I went from a case to crutches. Inside my body, vital organs were beginning to fail. A partly paralyzed diaphragm made breathing difficult, and asthma and pneumonia became chronic problems. I needed a Foley catheter for bladder control, and when I lost bowel function and ileostomy. By 1978, I was in a wheelchair. My feet and hands curled and all but useless, and I required a constant supply of oxygen. That year, I went to the Mayo Clinic, hoping to discover new techniques to help my labored breathing. There weren't any. Clinic doctors didn't hold out false hope. Pray, Barbara, they told me. Nothing we can do will stop the deterioration. Really sad, wow. Pray, a glitch, not to me. Oh, pray, a click, not to me. As a child of 9, I committed my life to Jesus. Then as a teenager, I drifted away from the commitment until one of my doctors and his wife helped me close to God again, helped bring me close to God again. This happened when I was 20, around the time my MS was diagnosed. Over the next few years, my church pastor, Meredith Bailey, became a special friend, visiting me every day after day. It was Pastor Bailey who helped me discover what I needed most. A goal one even a disabled person could strive for. And the goal was to grow in faith. It became my job, something I could do despite all the pain and loss of bodily captivity. And I worked at it. Sometimes I failed, gave up, lost God, asked why. Yet always, no matter how low or sick or abandoned I felt, I'd eventually get a little spiritual nudge, a reminder of all the people in my church. Turn. Okay, it's hard to turn with one hand. All the people in my church and community who were praying for me. Now, after the gym visit to the Mayo, I felt a new urgency about God. The less physical health I had, the more I yearned for spiritual health. I cried out to God, please, I can't even read your word anymore. I need something to do. Over and over, I pleaded for something to counteract the fact that I could barely move. I craved activity, action. I called out to God for it. His answer came not in a flash, not overnight, but through prayer itself. Praying is action. Pray for others. How simple, how possible. Until that thought came to me, I had seen prayer as passive. Now I saw that praying for others could be my gymnastics, my flute playing, my special activity. I had prayed for others before, but now it became a compelling need, a vocation. I spent hours in prayer and reading the Bible. When friends came over, I would ask them to read to me or pray with me. I talked to God often, out loud, as if He were standing right beside me. My condition continued to worsen. A lung collapse. Most of the time I could barely see. Technically, I was blind in 1980. I had a tracheostomy. An incision was made in my windpipe to allow a more direct connection to my oxygen supply. My parents had made changes in our house to accommodate my needs. Ramps for my electric wheelchair, a hospital bed for me, and tubing running through 3 rooms so I could hook up to my oxygen concentrator in different locations. Everyone knew I was dying. My doctors confirmed it. Then came June 7th, 1981. It was a Sunday, my sister Jan's 29th birthday. She was coming over to celebrate, and I looked forward to giving my mother at least some token help with making the cake. I remember thinking what a bright, clear birthday it was when my mother came into my room. "Ready to give the cake batter a few licks?" she asked. I nodded. With my mother helping, I began to struggle to hitch myself out of bed and into my wheelchair. My legs had begun drawing into a fetal position, and it was impossible for me to put my feet flat on the floor. We transferred tubing on my tracheostomy to the oxygen supply mounted on my wheelchair, gathered my various receptacles around me, and then I used my forearm to push down the starter level on my wheelchair. In the kitchen, I managed to stir the cake batter a couple of times, despite the fact that my hands had turned inward in the point where my fingers almost touched my wrists. By now, even that small effort exhausted me, and I asked my mother to help me get into bed. After a while, my Aunt Ruthie came to my room to read letters and cards from people who listened to a Chicago radio station's WMBI, a program called Cup of Cold Water, had featured me as an invalid needing cheer. Wow. Most of the well-wishers mentioned that they were praying for me. My aunt left to help my mother, and shortly after noon, 2 friends, Joyce Jugan and Angela Crawford, popped in after the morning worship service at my church. Then, as the 3 of us visited, I heard a 4th voice, a firm, audible voice, over my left shoulder. "My child, get up and walk." Startled, I looked at my friends. I could see that they had not heard the voice. "Joyce, Angela," I blurted. "God just spoke to me." As he said to get up and walk, I heard him. The 2 women stared at me. I know, it's weird," I said, "but God really did speak to me. Please run and get my family. I want them." They flew out of the hallway, called my sisters and parents, rushed back into the room. I couldn't wait any longer. I took the oxygen tube from my throat, removed the brace from my arm, and actually jumped out of bed. And there I stood on 2 legs and hadn't held the weight of my body in over 5 years. This wasn't possible, of course. There were 1,001 medical reasons why this couldn't be happening, yet there I stood firmly, solidly, feeling tingly all over, as if I had stepped from an invigorating shower. I could breathe freely, and I could see me, a whole healthy me. My hands were normal, not curled to my wrists. The muscles in my arms and legs were filled out and whole. My feet were flat to the floor. like a dancer's, and oh, the step I danced as I headed toward the doorway. I met my mother in the hallway. She stopped short, and then she lifted the hem of my nightgown. Her eyes widened, her arms flung wide. "Barbara," she cried, "you have calves again." Dad was on the wheelchair ramp to the family room. Speechless, he wrapped me in his arms and waltzed me around and around. Then everyone, my parents, Aunt Ruthie, Jan, my teenage sister Amy, applauded wildly while I tried some ballet steps I hadn't done 16 years. Next, I walked to the couch, sat down, and stood up again. Down, up, 6 times in a row. Angela Crawford, an occupational therapist, obtessed and x-rayed my lungs. The film showed normal lungs before one lung was collapsed and the other was functioning at only 50% of its capacity. Finally, Dr. Marshall shook his head in amazement. He found no signs of MS. He removed the tube in my neck, took out the catheter, and told me to forget my medications. One of the surgeons, Dr. Harold Adolph, summed up my case in a written report. At the present time, the patient has no findings of multiple sclerosis, walks normally, speaks normally, and is very happy, as is her family, over the obvious answer to prayer and the good hand of God in her life. Wow, what a total testimony. Her name is Barbara Cummiskey. Wow, what a great story. I was just given this today, June 3rd. I don't know why God healed me. So I don't understand that. Why would God want anyone to suffer like that? Like she suffered way over 10 years. I don't know why God healed me. I don't believe I earned or deserved a healing any more than I deserved MS. I only know that on the morning of June 7th, 1981, I felt good about myself mentally, emotionally, and spiritually well. Through my prayer life, I was a busy, active member of the human family, not running or jumping or even walking like most people, but not separated from them by bitterness, self-pity, or despair. My mind and spirit were healthy and whole. And then God made my body whole too. Wow, that is just a wonderful story. And, like, whatever negativity I'm thinking, like, that was a great misdirection. People need to be encouraged. People need to have support. And unfortunately, all my insane abusers were the opposite to me. And they all made me want to die. That's just a fact. I'm not mentally ill. I didn't want to die. But when I was around them, sometimes, really bad circumstances, naturally I wanted to die all by myself, but, insane. So you need support somehow. Support has to come from somewhere. And you need, mental support. To be mentally healthy is the number one key to stay, physically healthy in every other way. Mental health is number one in my book, but you can't have an insane abuser around fucking cutting you up into pieces and making you want to die. Like, you know, when somebody keeps on attacking you and attacking you and attacking you and attacking you and attacking, you can't help it but want to die. There's no reason for them to ever do that to you. And it is all their fault. It really is. You know, like, there's no reason for all of their demons, in my opinion, to just, they hate themselves. So they just keep on attacking you, attacking their victim, their favorite victim. Well, there's something wrong with them. Well, they're crazy. Well, they stole my belonging in my room. They took that. They did this. They did that. It's their fault. And, you know, everything is their favorite victim's fault. And it should never, ever be that way. Never. And they should face the consequences for what they do to their victim. But they don't. And you know, time and time again, there's not like one insane abuser in my life who ever face the consequences for all the torture that they mentally put me through. They put me through mental torture. And they shouldn't have done that. Right? You don't lie to somebody again and again and again and again. It's wrong.